Welcome classic rock fans to another episode of New Album Review, and today I'd like to be looking at Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, in particular their new album Who Built the Moon. Noel Gallagher's band High Flying Birds have been described by the ex-Oasis man as himself in more colourful clothes, and there's certainly a vividness to them, I think, and there's certainly a vividness to this album. Who Built the Moon is certainly a record that is almost like a homage to all his influences. All these influences seem to exude from every note that's struck. We get there's some very sort of Smithsonian type riffs, no doubt aided by the fact that Johnny Marr guests on this album. We also get tin whistles that wouldn't sound out of place on a late 60s psychedelic record. And there's also that very distinctive thump of sort of riotous glam rock. And certainly the sort of vibrancy and strains of psychedelia don't feel out of place on this album at all. They don't feel like, it doesn't feel intrusive. In fact, to quote one critic, they act as a perfect foil for the record's blissed out lyrics about life-changing love. For me, the highlights are the Slade-esque Holy Mountain, Black and White Sunshine, which has been described by one critic as resembling Oasis basking on a sun lounger. No doubt it's quite interesting that this album follows fairly hard upon the release of Liam Gallagher's album. No doubt that's going to encourage comparisons, certainly in the sort of music press and music media. Interestingly, if I may quote NME have said, Team Liam prefers things as they were, one massive Larry loving, whereas Team Noel, meanwhile, are embracing a more experimental mindset, and thereby some immense twist of cosmic irony, finally starting to live up to all those frigging Beatles comparisons at last. They also go on to say that Who Built the Moon, Noel's songwriting remains indebted to the Beatles and the blues. That's NME for you. Also on this album, his lyrics still remain sort of cheerfully vague. It's an aspect of Noel Gallagher's songwriting I've always really enjoyed. He seems to prefer rhyme over logic in many respects, and I suspect that's kind of the influence of sort of 60s pop. Also, we get that sort of distinctive mix of major and minor chords, giving the melodies a very strange tension, if you like, sort of forever balance between melancholy and optimism. This album is certainly interesting, really, to say the least. It has a couple of nice instrumentals, but it's an album with sort of feisty vignettes rather than sort of anthemic stompers, if you like. Nevertheless, Who Built the Moon beams with sort of sonic surprises. When I first heard the opening single of the album, I saw him do it on the Jules Holland show. I immediately liked it. It reminded me of sort of early Roxy Music in many respects. It's sort of a distorted glam rock stomp in many ways, packed with horns and topped off with a very cheery sort of tin whistle. Get out of the doldrums, baby, yells Noel on that particular song, which in many ways could be the manifesto for the album. That being said, I think sometimes his vocals fight for space amid rather dense arrangements. We get that wonderful mix of unexpected elements like shimmering synths, phased guitars, and a lot of that's got to be attributed to the experimental producer David Holmes. I think David Holmes has kind of facilitated a new spirit of openness in Noel Gallagher's writing in many respects. It could be said his previous two solo albums were kind of heading towards a predictable trajectory of sort of worthy retro rock. The Daily Telegraph have described Noel Gallagher as, I quote, an inveterate musical magpie. And there's certainly lots of moments on this album which he sort of borrowed from pop music history. But there are lots of influences that his cap is doffed to that we wouldn't usually expect on a Noel Gallagher album. Things like plenty of odd sort of stitches from sort of rock's musical tapestry, things like krautrock, soundtracks of Velvet Underground. There's also a wonderful song done in kind of the flavour of Phil Spector's Wall of Sound. So it's a riot of musical colour in many respects, ingeniously marshalled by its producer, really, which has allowed these very punchy sort of songs to allow kind of Noel Gallagher's sort of melodic instincts to really shine through. The album has been described by a lot of fans on social media as a kind of a blend of, if I may quote, the Vaccines, Mott the Hoople, Ricky Martin, which makes it sound all very schizophrenic in many respects. But as I said, there are a lot of influences that come to the fore here. If Love Is the Law, Phil Spector, and also, not to mention, Be Careful What You Wish For, which sounds like a very sort of trippy remix of the Beatles Come Together. Certainly one of the standout tracks on the album is called Fort Knox. I mean, it's opening with sort of swooping planes and the drums, the way the drums come beating in. It's almost like a fanfare overture for the album. It's reminiscent of his 1996 collaboration with the Chemical Brothers, Setting Sun. That's what this song reminds me of. One of the songs I really love on this album is It's a Beautiful World, which really reminds me of the Velvet Underground. You get a lyric like, I sing a song of love and you can teach me what you know about death. It certainly seems to smack of a kind of a Lou Reed influence there. Personally, my opinion is that this album is by far his best sort of post-Oasis solo work. It's an album that doesn't challenge that heritage, but nevertheless, it's an album that strikes out to explore new territory. And there's no doubt that musically, it's pretty absorbing stuff. This album then, without a doubt, sort of stretches boundaries. It digs a few new grooves, darkens atmospheres, previous established atmospheres, adds an extra degree of psychedelia to the rhythms, and it's an unforced progression, I think. Certainly, I think one question that will be asked of me is, which album do I prefer, Liam Gallagher's album or this one? Please check out the new album review that I did on Liam Gallagher's album. I will say this, Liam's album is certainly more arresting and it's more immediate, and you just almost love it on its first listen. This album, I think, takes a little bit more time to grow on you, but I think that, in my mind, is the hallmarks of a classic album in waiting. Anyway, you've been watching an episode of New Album Review. Please click like, subscribe, check out the Facebook page, but more importantly, please do keep listening.